Okay, Year 10, we're up to video number 3. In today's video, I'm going to be talking about plantation versus old growth timber. Now, what I mean by this is at the end of today's lesson, you're going to know what a plantation timber is. I don't think you need to know it already. We're going to tell you what that is. We're going to tell you how they're grown, and we're going to tell you how they're different from old growth timbers. You should be able to understand at the end of today how plantation timbers are used in the furniture making industry and how they help to make the timber industry more sustainable. And you should probably have a bit of an understanding about why old growth timbers are so valuable, why they cost so much more when you go to the shop. You will do, things that you're going to do is you're going to identify 2 different species of timbers that are grown in Australian plantations. One of them needs to be a softwood and one needs to be a hardwood. So you need to think about video number 1 where we talked about hardwoods and softwoods. You then need to combine that understanding with this video to find 1 hardwood and 1 softwood grown in Australia in plantations. Okay? Your textbook has some great information for this in the materials chapter. There is an Edpuzzle quiz that we will share with you on old growth forests, and we're also going to ask you to do an extended response. Okay? And you'll see that document has been shared with you on Classroom as well. Let's get started with what is a plantation. A plantation is a managed stand of trees. They have been artificially planted with a species of timber laid out in rows. Now, what I mean by that, that's really technical. Plantations are farms where trees are grown. Someone goes through and gets a whole heap of seeds and plants them in a row in a farm and helps them to grow over a number of years. Looks after them while they grow so that they can then be chopped down. Okay? These trees are grown specifically to be chopped down. Okay? We are farming trees. So here we go. These plantation species can be hardwoods or softwoods. Usually the hardwoods are eucalypt trees and usually the softwoods are pine trees. Now, generally speaking, the hardwoods have harder and denser wood, and these trees reproduce by producing seeds with a soft covering, okay, like a fruit, or seeds with a hard covering like a nut. Okay, we spoke about that already in our hardwood talk. The softwoods, however, they are softer and less dense woods. They tend to be easier to cut when you're in the workshop. They grow quite fast, and they include conifers, okay? Trees that have needles, not leaves, a conifer is the term, such as a pine tree. And the seeds are what we call naked seeds. They come out of a cone and the seeds just then fall out into the ground so that the tree can continue its life as a new tree. So plantations are farms of trees that are grown specifically so that we can cut them down. You can see in the graphic, it starts off with very tiny little saplings or seedlings of trees, and then eventually those trees grow up into a suitable height ready for harvesting. When they are harvested, a new forest is then started to be grown. Now these forests usually take around about, if we're talking about softwoods and we're talking about pine trees and we're talking about in Australia, these usually take around about 25 to 30 years to grow. So what that means is if you wanted to start a tree farm, if you planted a tree today, you're not going to be able to cut it down to make money until 2050, 30 years away. What you need to do then to make this sustainable is every single year you need to plant trees. Okay, you can't afford to wait 30 years before you can make money. So what people do is they plant trees this year and they'll be ready in 2050. They plant trees next year and they'll be ready in 2051. And they plant more trees in the following year, ready for 2052. Okay? So you actually have to plan out and you have to have 30 years worth of trees growing at all times. So you are constantly in a cycle. The trees that you grow this year have to be enough trees for the amount of wood that you need to sell. So if we think about our workshops at school and we think about all the projects that we make at all the different year groups, We know how much timber we use. So we could actually start a farm if we wanted to, if we had the space, where we grew trees, and we would probably need to grow around about 50 trees per year to keep up with the amount of wood that we are using just at our school. Okay? So we're talking about a lot of trees in these farms, thousands and thousands of trees. And you can see an example here on the screen. See here in the example as well, a few things I'll point out to you. See how the trees are really tall and really skinny? That's what we spoke about when we spoke about the fact that when they're grown in a farm, there's not many branches down the bottom and there's lots of leaves at the top with nothing at the bottom. The other reason there's not many branches down the bottom is because every couple of years, the farmer needs to go through and cut the branches off. They do this on purpose to try and reduce the number of knots inside of the timber. It helps to create the timber straighter, stronger, and it helps to also, when they're farming the trees and they're chopping them down, it makes it that little bit easier to manage as well. Now in Australia, we have lots of tree farms. You probably don't know it, but we have plantations all over the country. And you see on the map here, we've got all of these dark green areas all the way around the coastlines of Australia, except not much in Western Australia where the deserts are, but down south where it's quite green, all the way around the east coast of Australia and at the top of Darwin where they get lots of water as well. We've got these enormous plantations. Now these are not just general forests, these are plantation forests where the trees are grown specifically so that they can be cut down and used for wood. Now these eucalypt trees, okay, eucalypts are hardwoods, and then we've got the acacia trees, okay, and you can see there's a couple of acacia trees around the place. They're sort of not grown as much, and then there are some other trees also grown. Now when we talk about the forests that we have, the forests could be native or they could be plantation forests. The map that I've got on the screen is just the plantation forests. These are the ones that have been grown specifically so that we can cut them down, and the trees were grown by men. Okay? What I mean by that is humans have gone in and planted these trees so that we can cut them down. The difference between a plantation forest and a native forest, or what we call an old growth forest, is that the trees were not planted by men. They were not planted by humans. The trees were planted by other trees having their seeds fall down and they start then growing. If we go all the way back to the origin stories and we bring all those sorts of things, these original trees were grown by God. Okay? So someone, somewhere, if they put a seed in the ground so that they could grow it, okay, if a human has done that, then it's a plantation tree. If it has grown naturally because the seed has fallen off the tree, or a bird has eaten a seed and done a poo somewhere and that's grown a tree, then that's a naturally occurring tree. And where we have forests filled with these naturally occurring trees, or these native growing trees, these native forests, these old growth forests, they are the most amazing landscapes. They are really dense, really thick forests. They don't look like this image here where there's a whole heap of gaps that you can look straight through. Now let's talk about these sustainable forests, these plantation forests. The first year, the trees are actually grown in a greenhouse, usually, so that the seeds can become a little sapling or a seedling. These seedlings then are planted when they're around about 5 years old. They're taken out of the greenhouse and put into the ground. In around about 10 years' time, okay, these trees are now growing and they're now an established tree. And every 5 years, they are thinned out. What this thinned out means, this is where someone goes through and removes all the branches down the bottom that are getting in the way. And any trees that might be not good quality are cut out of the forest so that they don't impact the rest of the trees around them. So if the farmer goes through and sees a tree that's growing crooked, or they see a tree that's filled with a fungus or is starting to get attacked by a bug, they cut that tree out and remove it from the forest so the rest of the trees can continue to grow. After 25 years, they're basically ready. Okay? They're ready to be cut down. But sometimes we give them up until they're 30 years old before they are cut down. And when the trees are finally cut down, the trunk is sent off to the wood mill where it is processed into pieces of timber, and all of the scrap pieces might be processed into paper or MDF and some of the other manufactured boards. The forest is then cleared out and new trees are grown, and 25 years later they come back and they start the process all over again. So I've got this video here. Again, I've linked this video into Google Classroom so you can watch it. But we'll have a quick flick through and we'll see some of the things. You can see how in these plantation forests, there are very straight rows. We can see straight down the row and it looks quite cool to look at. Okay? We're looking around them. These are the little seedlings being grown in greenhouses. Okay? These ones here are actually being grown outside, but they're still growing not in the finished farm. They're growing just in a special area for the younger trees. Now, as we start to move along here, we start to look at, okay, how are the trees actually cut down? And you'll see there is these amazing machines. We call these Waratah machines. They are able to grab a tree trunk, they chop it down, they turn the tree around, they strip all of the bark off it, they strip all of the branches off it. Not only that, but they also measure how thick the tree trunk is and record a whole heap of information on this computer system so that they can work out exactly how much wood they've cut down and how much wood they've sent off to the shop. So you see this amazing section here. It actually not only does all of that, but it cuts them into smaller lengths as well so they fit on the trunk when they're ready to be transported away. Okay? So it's quite a cool process. All of the information gets collected and is able to be accessed via a computer by the person running the farm. And you can see they go through and these tree trunks are chopped into little bits and pieces where they're then made into wood, okay, ready to be used in our workshops at school. So I really recommend you watch that video. It only goes for 5 minutes. It's a fantastic video to watch and will give you a really good understanding of how pine trees are grown in South Australia. So this video is specifically about Australia. So we spoke a lot about plantation timbers before. I'm now going to talk to you about old growth forests. Remember how I said these old growth forests are really beautiful? See how it's so overgrown, it's so green, it's really thick. There's some young trees, there's some old trees, there's all sorts of mosses and sorts of things growing around the trunks. This is an old growth forest. This is definitely naturally occurring. No human has come in here and planted these trees in perfect little rows. And you can tell that just by looking at it. Now, old growth forests exist in their original state. No one has gone in and disturbed them. Sometimes you can go bushwalking in old growth forests, but no one has gone in and started cutting trees down or putting roads and walkways in between. It's really undisturbed. They're extremely old in age. Now, if we think plantation trees are ready to be cut down after 30 years, old growth forests could be hundreds of years, thousands of years old. Okay? I have been to New Zealand, to the Kauri Forest north of Auckland, and there are some enormous trees there that they estimate, they don't even know because they've never cut one down, but they estimate them to be the oldest trees on Earth. Even more so, Canada has some amazing redwood forests, as does Tasmania, where again, they also believe they may have the oldest trees on Earth, hundreds if not thousands of years old. Because these trees have been growing for so long, they are extremely valuable. The timber in them is very dense. We know that when a tree takes a long time to grow, that the cells are really tightly packed together. You remember me talking about that in our first video. The slower the tree grows, the tighter the grain is, the more dense the timber is. Usually that means the timber is nice and strong. Strong timbers are always very valuable. Now, because these trees take so long to grow, the other reason they're expensive is because if you cut them down, you can't just get them back in 30 years. You have to wait hundreds of years again before there is another one ready for you to chop down. So that's why we talk about them being extremely valuable timbers. They're not only valuable in terms of the cost to a human, but they're also valuable to the ecosystem. If we think about these forests, when a tree eventually falls down because it it's old or it dies, it still contributes to the whole ecosystem. You can see this tree that's fallen down here many years ago because it's all hollow out. This tree, as it falls down, it decays and it rots, provides nutrients to all of the other trees around it as those nutrients enter the soil. It provides a habitat for animals to live inside of, for other species of shrub and of mosses and grasses to grow in as well. In an old growth forest, even when you die, you're still contributing to the forest. Right? You don't have this sort of experience in a plantation or in a farm. Now have a look at this map. If we have a look at our forests around Australia, we have forests all over the place. And we know that most of these are plantation forests, but we have lots of old growth forests. Around about 70% of the old growth forests we have in Australia are in protected national parks, parks that you're not allowed to go in. And there's actually a small section in New South Wales hidden deep inside the national park. I don't even know where it is, and I'm not able to tell you where it is if I did know, that contains these very old trees called Wollemi pines. And they're believed to be the first trees that were grown in Australia. They're very valuable. And lots of people try to find them and try to chop them down because of how valuable the timber is. During the Australian bushfires that happened during Christmas of 2019 and at the start of 2020, there was actually a specialist team of firefighters that was helicoptered in to the middle of this protected forest to set up a specific fire sprinkler system to protect these Wollemi pines from burning if the bushfires got to them. Luckily, none of them were burned down, but you can see they're so valuable, these trees, cost-wise and to the ecosystem, that firefighters were risking their lives being helicoptered into the most dense bushland in Australia, into a secret location just to protect some trees. Now, if you've ever been to the Blue Mountains and you've driven through the Blue Mountains, you would have seen all of the eucalypt trees, all of the gum trees in that massive forest over on the right-hand side as you travel through the mountains. These are old growth forests. They are not plantation forests. They've been growing for hundreds of years, and they contain thousands, millions of eucalypt trees. Okay? And so these are examples of old growth forests in Australia. There are over 75 different animal and plant species that rely on old growth forests to survive. Bats, owls, small kangaroos, rock wallabies, possums. There are 75 species in Australia that if we chopped all of these old trees down, these 75 species would no longer be able to survive because they cannot survive in plantation forests, and they would have no habitat to go to if we chopped these old growth forests down. So that's the end of today's lecture. I hope that one's been really helpful for you. Like I said, we've got a small Quizlet we'd like you to watch and answer those questions. And in addition to that, there's an extended response we'd like to get you to. Now, there's a couple of days before this work is due, but please make sure you put in a good effort to it and come back to this video if you need additional help. Thank you.